Good evening. Welcome to the 2025 EMC Symposium. I'd like to ask that you please silence your phones. Tonight, you're going to hear from 6 students about the research that we've been doing for the past 10 months. My name is Najwa Frimpong, and for the last 10 months, I've been studying really fast cars and the drivers who drive them. So right now, I want you to imagine a man. He's raced 361 races. And of these 361 races, he's gone to the podium, which is the top 3 steps, first, second, third, 202 times. And of those 202 times, he's won 105 races. Everything I just mentioned is a world record. And the man I'm talking about right now is Lewis Hamilton. He's one of the many fantastic drivers in Formula One. And he's one of the few that I'll be talking about with you tonight. Now imagine you're Lewis Hamilton. Your life lies within the strength of the metal beneath you and the mentality within you. Think of high speeds and even higher pressure. The risk of death stands upon you the second you touch the track. You're surrounded by beautiful sights and dangerous drivers. This is Formula One, a world-class motorsport. Now, while European-based, Formula One has a huge, diverse community, and it's enriched with many cultures. This is where we get our record breakers, and our trailblazers. Now let's talk about the cars real quick. These cars are so unique, and they truly are the description of the pinnacle of motorsport. I'd also like to say that Formula One was built on the basis of today's theme, which is pushing boundaries. Now whether it's destroying the limits of the track or cracking a world record, everything here, every boundary here was made to be broken. So today, we're going to take a deep dive into the history of Formula One. We're going to see how cars and drivers work together as a catalyst for development. Now let's look at the key moments that led to the current greatness in F1. But before we do all that, let me tell you why you should let me stand up here and talk to you about all of this. Now, I started watching Formula One about a year ago. And yeah, that isn't exactly a long period of time. I can tell you that this sport has genuinely changed the way that I think. And yes, that includes me pretending I'm an F1 driver when I'm trying to navigate through these crowded hallways. If you ask my friends, sometimes it's the only thing I can talk about. So, a year ago, I watched this movie called Gran Turismo. This is about endurance motorsport, nothing to do with F1. It was about this guy named Jan Mardenborough and his rise in motorsports, and I genuinely loved it. But throughout the entire two hours, I genuinely had no idea what motorsport I was watching. And the only motorsport I had heard at the time was F1. So, as one does, I Googled it. And fun fact, Jan Mardenborough and Formula One have nothing in common. There's no connection between the two of them. But I pursued my search anyway. And this led to me finding about Lewis Hamilton. Now, I loved the way he presented himself. I loved all the engineering and all the drama and everything that really encompassed Formula One. So it led to my increase in their media. So I was watching movies, I was watching shows, and eventually I was watching races, which has led to where I am today. Also, I talked to RPI's Formula SAE team, which is a collegiate level engineering competition. They recently competed nationally and got in 7th place, so congratulations to them. Also, like everyone else here, I spent the last 10 months researching my project, which was Formula One car analysis. So today we're going to go into a timeline of the safety developments and the engineering advancements in Formula One. We're starting off in the 1950s with Juan Manuel Fangio and Jim Clark. There's a total of 7 world championships on the screen. Now, Fangio somehow became the president of Mercedes-Benz Argentina, while Jim Clark went on to win the 1965 Indy 500, which is a huge American race. Now, a big part of their careers was the tubular space frame chassis. Now, this was lightweight with a rigid structure made of interconnecting tubes. And for an initial design, it did a pretty good job at distributing weight and offering stability. But it was soon adapted into the monocoque chassis. This was even more lightweight and even more rigid, and is currently the structure used in modern-day Formula One cars. Another big person in this time period was Niki Lauda. Now, this man had 3 world championships, and he was called the Rat. Not only for his looks, but for his instinct for survival. Also, he literally burned in his car. And a month out of getting out of the hospital, he hopped right back in the car and drove again. Now, after this incident, there was an increase in improved fire-resistant materials. I'm talking about Kevlar, I'm talking about Nomex, and all of these things are officially mandated into Formula One now. Now let's move on to the next time period. Before I hop into all that, I want to let you know that Formula One is 75 years old. And this year is their anniversary. So in that much time, there's been so much development. We're about to look at two icons here. Alain Prost, AKA the Professor, and Michael Schumacher. These two are contenders for the greatest in history. Now, Alain Prost had 4 world championships, and he had a huge rivalry with a man named Ayrton Senna, who I'm going to mention in a second. Well, Michael Schumacher holds the world championship record of 7, and this man in his prime, untouchable. Now, they used semi-automatic gearboxes. Now, this allowed them to change gears without using a clutch pedal. So in these images, you see an automatic gearbox. There's a pedal in there, I promise. And here we have the semi-automatic gearbox, and right there is where we can see a lever that replaced the pedal. And as a sneak peek, this is what a modern-day Formula One steering wheel looks like. I know, crazy. Also, in this time period, for this innovation, it was a huge turning point in the advancement of Formula One. This led to quicker actions, as drivers had everything right in front of them, which led to quicker cars and unique driving styles and all of that. Now, Ayrton Senna, who I just mentioned. He had 3 world championships, and this man was a national hero in Brazil. But unfortunately, in 1994, he passed away due to an engineering error in his car, and he crashed into a wall. Now, after this incident, the head and neck support device was developed. This restricted intense whiplash and neck movement. And I can tell you from looking at the races, from looking at the stats, this device has saved so many lives. But all of this is in the past. Let's look at the present real quick. Here we have my GOAT, who I personally think is the greatest of all time, Lewis Hamilton, along with the current world champion, Max Verstappen. Now, Lewis Hamilton holds the world championship record, which is 7, while Max Verstappen currently holds a consecutive bold 4 world championships. And both of them are, again, contenders for the best in Formula One history. Now, a newly created source of power for them were the hybrid power units. Now, stick with me. This used turbocharged V6 internal combustion engines on a hybrid electric system. That makes sense of that. They increased fuel efficiency, meaning drivers could drive longer without having to worry about gas or energy. On top of that, this reduced those bad fuel emissions while increasing the power output of the vehicle. Now, finally, we're going to look at this recently retired driver named Sebastian Vettel. Now, he also had 4 world championships, and he was known for his adaptability while he was racing. At the time of his racing, he was also the head of the Formula One Drivers Union. And right now, he's working as an activist. But before I mention him again, I want to talk to you about Jules Bianchi. Now, this man was loved throughout Formula One. All the community loved him, all the drivers loved him, but unfortunately, in 2014, he passed away after crashing into a construction vehicle on the track. Now, this led to the development of the Halo device. Now, many people were against it, but Sebastian Vettel advocated for it. He tested it himself with a halo around his head and over the cockpit. And I can tell you, just like the Hans device, this has saved so many lives and has protected so many individuals. So we just went through a bunch of things. We saw how this death on wheels went to the current pinnacle of motorsport. Now, again, we jumped throughout the history. We saw how these crazy car developments, and we saw the different brilliant minds that drove them. But one question I bet you have is, what makes this sport so interesting? What makes people want to shout at a TV screen or sit there and watch these weird little cars go in weird little shapes? Well, apart from the obvious, this sport is filled with intensity and risk. More specifically, crashes. Sometimes these safety developments and these safety measures don't live up to expectations, and F1 is filled with them. Some circuits are even notorious for them. But happily, these innovations have saved lives. There's so much in Formula One. Every year the car is broken down and rebuilt. with the engineers looking for new ways to improve the car for the following season. With records broken and barriers shattered, I can tell you that these engineers worked to defy what was previously thought. They built up new barriers just to break them down again and again. Now, imagine you're Lewis Hamilton again. Stick with me. And no, that does not in fact mean go pedal to the metal and book it out the parking lot. I want you to gain full awareness of the fact that your journey home will be a collaboration between the metal beneath you and the mentality within you. Thank you and drive safe. Next, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Shavi Gupta.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm Shavi Gupta, a senior here at GHS. Throughout my time at GHS, I have met so many different people. I've met great people, not so great people, people in between. But every single one of these people have made an impact on me, have shaped me to become who I am. I've always loved people and learning about them, which is why I decided to conduct my EMC research this year on attachment theory, or the study of the relationships between people. It's also why I'm studying psychology next year at Middlebury College in Vermont. So, every single one of you here has countless relationships with so many different people every day. You have your parents, your friends, your coworkers, your siblings, your kids. Each and every one of these people has a profound impact on who you are. Each and every one of these people has an effect on the person you want to be. So what does attachment theory have to do with all of this? Attachment theory draws from the idea that your parenting and how your parents treated you affects how you act in relationships. Attachment theory basically says if you came from a more secure and happy household, you are more likely to show that in relationships. You're more likely to act in a secure way. However, on the other hand, if you came from a more traumatic or abusive even household, you're less likely to act in a healthy way in relationships, and you're more likely to act in insecure ways. So imagine a girl, 8 years old, already broken. She reaches out, wants connection, but finds none. She just really needs it to be a love story. Imagine a teenage boy. He wants to form a healthy relationship with the ones around him, but he's too closed off. He just really needs to be loved. Imagine a mom adopting a baby. However, the baby doesn't know how to love her back. She blames herself, thinks it's her fault. She just really needs to be loved. All of these people show signs of having insecure attachment or an attachment disorder. In fact, studies show that about 40% of Americans suffer from an attachment disorder. This means this is a prevalent issue to all of you. There's a very good chance that someone in this room has an attachment disorder or knows someone and is struggling from a relationship with someone that suffers from attachment disorder. Relationships are the best thing we do. If I was to ask you right now, what brings meaning to your life? I know for a fact that so many of you would mention a loved one. If I was to ask you what your purpose was, you would probably say your kids or your family. I think as a society, we all owe it to each other to show up and be the best version of ourselves. I think we owe it to each other to just try and be the best we can in all our relationships, to love each other better, to form these better relationships. And sometimes we don't show up as our best version. Sometimes we aren't in these secure, healthy relationships. But I think through study on attachment theory, we can learn how to be. So how did this all begin? It all started in 1969 with a psychologist named Mary Ainsworth. Ainsworth was conducting research in Africa on infants and their relationships with their caregivers. Basically, she brought in a bunch of babies and their parents and conducted a bunch of trials involving separation of the infant and their parent, and their unification. Based on the infant's reaction to being separated and reunited with their parents, Ainsworth created the 4 attachment styles we now know today. Some babies were very emotional once their parents left. They took a lot to try and console them afterwards, but others were completely indifferent. And based on these infants' reactions, she came up with the 4 attachment styles. So these are the 4 attachment styles. Starting off, we have secure attachment. This is the goal. When you're in a secure relationship, you have confidence and you have self-worth. You know your place in the relationship and you're happy and healthy. This is where relationships thrive. This is where lives thrive. This is where you can accept and give support freely. This is where you're happy and you're the best version of yourself, not only for yourself, but the people around you and your loved ones who you're having these relationships with. Then we have the 3 insecure attachment styles. We have anxious attachment. Individuals with anxious attachment show signs of over-emotionalness and clinginess. They are not very secure in themselves. They lack that self-respect. They lack that sense of self. They constantly need others to reassure them in who they are, and they look to relationships as a way to become more confident in themselves. Then we have avoidant attachment. Individuals with avoidant attachment basically do exactly that. They avoid empathy, they avoid emotions, they avoid relationships, they prefer more casual flings. And then we have disorganized attachment. This is the one that has been least researched, and it is honestly the most complicated of the 4 attachment styles, but it's sort of a mix of all of the other ones. It involves a push and pull. It involves a deep need for emotional attachment and deep relationships. However, it also involves fear of relationships, which creates a push and pull dynamic, because on one hand they want a relationship, but they're scared of it. So today I wanted to break down the 4 attachment styles using characters from a TV show I know and love, and I hope you all are at least somewhat familiar with: Law & Order Special Victims Unit. So to start off with avoidant attachment, I brought in the lead detective, Detective Elliot Stabler. He's also my favorite character, but I know that's a controversial opinion. So I thought Stabler embodied avoidant attachment well, because he does tend to take more of a hands-back approach when it comes to emotional investment in his cases. He tries to look at things more logically rather than put his emotional self in it. He stays more hands-back in relationships, and he isn't really very touchy-feely. I think in the show this definitely comes from a childhood that was more focused on being a manly man, where emotions were more suppressed, and it definitely shows in the character, and I thought he embodied avoidant attachment. And then for anxious attachment, I brought in ADA Casey Novak. I thought she embodied anxious attachment well, because she does put a lot of emotional investment into her cases, and honestly, there are times where she puts a lot of her self-worth in others. She uses her bosses and her higher-ups to feel better about herself. She doesn't really have that self-confidence as a lot of people with anxious attachment do. She's a natural-born people pleaser. She doesn't really do things for herself. She's constantly seeking that approval and that validation that she lacks in herself, which is kind of the textbook definition of anxious attachment. And then for the last insecure attachment style, I brought in Detective Munch to represent disorganized attachment. I thought Munch did this well through his history. He had been married and divorced 4 times, which definitely causes trauma and that disorganized attachment. I think you can see this in his desire for intimacy and his desire for emotional connection, but then he also has times where he pushes away and uses humor to deflect more serious emotions, which is kind of demonstrates the push and pull aspect of disorganized attachment. And finally, we have secure attachment. We have Olivia Benson, the head of the crew. I thought Benson did a good job of displaying secure attachment because she is very secure in who she is. She has that self-confidence to project onto others and have those secure relationships. She's very comfortable with her feelings and her emotions, and she's comfortable sharing them and building close connections with others. So secure attachment is obviously where we should all strive to be. When we have this secure attachment, we are our best selves and we can thrive. Secure attachment is a catalyst for all happy relationships and necessary for a happy life. So yes, attachment disorder is a devastating reality for so many individuals. It prevents us from living our happiest lives. It prevents us from being our true selves in relationships. Attachment disorder just impacts not only us, but our loved ones who we try so hard to be good for. But the truth is that with every tragedy, there is hope. Even though you may find yourself leaning towards some of these tendencies today, through therapy, counseling, and just talking it out in self-reflection, you can work on becoming a more secure, happier version of yourself. Because I think at the end of the day, we all want to be the best version of ourselves for our loved ones and show up in every way we can for the people that matter to us most. And remember, even if sometimes you feel like you have an insecure attachment, all these characters today had insecure attachment. Together, they form a secure unit, a special victims unit. I would like to welcome Shruti Manga to the stage.
Sorry. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Shrutika Manga, and today, after much trial and many more errors, I've decided to talk about what I know best. Sorry about that. Gossip. Yeah, that's right, petty high school drama, because at the end of the day, I'm a teenager. And much like the number of times I've fallen on my face when it comes to EMC, I've similarly fallen on my face when it comes to life. You know, because things never go according to plan. So to start off today, I'd like to introduce you all to two of my greatest foes this year, the past and the future. And so sadly, no, I will not be leaking screenshots of iMessage fights or voice recordings, God forbid. But I need you to stick with me here. I'd like you to imagine the past and the future as two characters in my life. The past, she's a lot to handle. She's a D1 hoarder and just overall a mess. The future is the person at the corner at parties trying to find a peaceful spot to meditate despite being on the verge of a mental breakdown. She's the I need more space, I need more time, indecisive individual I know that we all know. Now that you have a good sense of their personalities, I would like you to imagine one last thing. I know, I'm asking a lot here, but I'd like you to imagine my brain. Think of it as a piece of land. Hey, my brain's not that small. All right, that's much better. All right, obviously, as you can tell, these two great foes of mine take up a great deal of this space that is my brain. And if you can notice, there isn't a lot or really any space for much else. So you might be wondering about character 3 in our scenario, the present. You might be asking yourself, where is the present? And you know, I share your panic because junior year of high school has been a blur for me. And it is hard to figure out, okay, where is the now? Where am I right now? So this year, through my EMC project, I was able to figure out what the present truly is and where it lies in this obviously very large piece of land that is my brain. So this year in EMC, I decided to write a sequence of short stories. Stories because I really want to do something more creative-oriented than research-oriented, and short because, well, like you saw with the depiction of my brain, people don't make space for the now, and people rarely have time to read an entire book these days. And no, for the last time, not just because my brain is small. Gosh. As you can see with things like TikTok on the rise, people often make time for short, mass-consumed things, but not longer works. And I'm guilty of this. For some reason, in my brain, it takes less time to focus on a bunch of short tasks rather than focus on one long task for the same amount of time. So now that we've established why short stories, I realized while I was beginning to write that I really had to narrow this topic down. I needed to have an idea that I explored all year. And I chose to write a bunch of narratives surrounding the topic of coins, a series of tales, if you will. These tales all came together unknowingly to forge this story about my past, future, and present. Now I know that's a different order than you might usually hear, but that'll all make sense in a few minutes. So at this point, you might be questioning my decision on why coins? I mean, I know a lot of people here probably think they're outdated. And, you know, coins are pretty great. They're shiny, and if you pool some together, you can get, okay, well, admittedly, not much today, but to me, coins mean so much more. When my parents, yes, that's my parents, yeah, they didn't know that was in the slide, but when my parents first moved to the country, they did not have a lot of money. So every penny mattered. Along with the many traditions they started when they first came here, collecting coins in a jar was one of them. And while today we might no longer need that jar of coins, it serves as a reminder to me to work just as hard as they did, or at least even a fraction of how hard they did. Because I fathom that I would be a much different person than if I didn't know the value that these coins held. And this was the premise of my first short story for EMC this year. I decided to base it off of a family much like mine who had this jar of coins. But they had a daughter who, unlike me, was oblivious to the real meaning of why there was this jar of coins in her house. And while admittedly this wasn't the best story I wrote all year, it served as an anchor as to why I started this journey in EMC this year. And it helped me remember how the past continues to shape me today. But the thing is, the past, I know I described her before as a hoarder and all these like terrible things, but also the past holds some of my precious memories and my most fond moments that make me, me. But at the same time, there's limitations. If you let the past control who you are, rather than using it as a springboard to jump off, you can get stuck. But see, the past was a foe that I was used to dealing with. We're always thinking back, and we're like, okay, how can I improve from what I was? But then came the second foe I butted heads with this year in EMC. And that was not so easy to maneuver. The future. We all think of the future. I know most of you in this audience are like, all right, what am I going to do when I go home? And please, stay on track here. But before this year, the most I thought the future had in store for me was what I was going to eat that day when I came home, or my weekend plans. Rarely did I ever think about, all right, what am I going to put on my college apps this summer? And worse, what am I going to do after college? Now, I apologize to everyone in the audience, especially if you're my age, for dropping the C word like that out of nowhere. So let's just shake it out. Let's take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. That's what I foolishly told myself as I entered my EMC midterm this year. Boy, I wasn't ready. I decided, for God knows why, I decided to write about a girl much like me. If you're seeing a common trend here, you should be. Most of these stories about me. But I decided to write about a girl that was much like me, who was deciding between two career choices. To be a doctor, or to be a lawyer. Now, the past, like I mentioned, was an enemy that I was used to dealing with. But this future, that's a danger zone. That is unknown territory, that is uncertain. I was like, I don't know how to do this. But the narrator of the story was a girl who was indecisive. And every single time she was faced with a decision on something she had to do in life, she would flip a coin and let it decide for her. But the problem was, this was fine for simple little things like, am I going to eat the sort of disgusting looking lunch my mom packed today or not? I apologize. But those things were very trivial. Then she had to decide on her career. How is she going to flip a coin for something as complex and important as her future career? Because all her life, she had stuck to this decision dime, this dime that decided what she would do. And whatever it said, she would stick with it. But with a leap of faith, she flipped the coin. Heads. The result? Doctor. With a side of despair. She suddenly realized that, whenever you flip a coin, you're always rooting for a side. When I'm flipping a coin, do I go to school today? Do I go to first block today or not? I'm always rooting for a side when I flip that coin. And she realized that this limited her. She wasn't making decisions for herself. So she decided to take a stand up, and in a moment of glorious enlightenment, she decided, you know what? I want to be a lawyer. Now, I say glorious enlightenment because in reality, this was not so glorious. In reality, it wasn't so easy to choose. Initially, even, I had my story this was the ending for my initial story. I had the coin flip and then land on its edge, much like you see in that picture over there. And this is because I was avoiding choosing. I was scared. And just to put this into perspective for all of you, having a coin land on its edge like that has a 0.017% chance of happening. So this ending was not only realistic, but it was also just lacking. And the major problem here was that for the character to grow, for the story to grow, I had to grow. And that meant I had to choose. And see, you might be thinking, this girl's crazy. How is she between law and medicine? Like, law's over here, medicine's over there. But to me, law and medicine were always two sides to the same coin. Both careers focusing on helping people, just in different aspects. But this was the biggest battle I had with the future. What I was gonna do. Yeah, the future has a characteristic of needing space, but I had used that as an excuse to not choose. And what really helped me get over this was the fact that I have that luxury. I have the luxury to choose. I mean, I am so grateful that my existential crisis is choosing between two solid careers. I mean, not everyone has that in life. And so I realized that when it comes to the future, you give it some space, but you also need to make a decision for the present. So yes, finally, character number 3 that we've all been waiting for. But actually, I would not like you to imagine the present as a character at all. And I'll explain that as I explain my last assignment for EMC this year, a short film. Now, I knew I wanted it to be cumulative. I wanted to somehow combine the past and its coins and the future in law. How was I going to do that? This question weighed heavily on my mind as I went to a March for Our Lives meeting in March, ironically. And for those of you in the audience that don't know, March for Our Lives is a club at our school that focuses on promoting gun safety and safe gun storage, as well as policies regarding gun violence, especially as it's very prevalent in the United States today. So during this meeting, we were watching a sequence of short films. And the short films really showed that raw emotion that people go through, showed that visual that people go through when there's a threat at a school or violence is in the community. And this was very different from the numbers we see on the screen when we watch the news, or the numbers that we hear about, or the schools from like all the way in like a different state that we hear about. This felt raw. And I felt wronged. I felt no one feels this emotion because not many people take the time to watch a short film about gun violence. This bothered me. And that bother lasted a few days, and then it lasted a few weeks until I realized this is what I want to do for my EMC short film this year. So I was thinking to myself, and I was like, okay, that's law. How are we going to tie in coins? I thought I was going to have to come up with some crazy narrative and twist in the coin somehow. But no, to my surprise, when I looked it up on Google, I came across an article about a teenager named Joshua O'Connor who was planning a school shooting. And the way he was planning it was that he would flip a coin to choose between two potential schools. Fortunately, his grandmother, who was living with him, found out these plans and was able to alert the police so that he would not follow through with them. And see, when I first read this story, I was a bit horrified, I'll admit. I was a bit horrified. Because all throughout the year, I had been writing about myself, like I had said before. And I know me, but gun violence? That's a bit of shaky territory there. I was scared to start writing this, scared of what opinions I might hurt, what I might discover. But I took a chance. I made my first short film. And see, I could have started this presentation with the present, with the now, where I am with my work with gun violence and March for Our Lives. But you would have missed the necessary context that is the past and the future, which is why I followed that skewed order: past, future, present. Because I realized in EMC this year that if you organize all that the past hoards and you condense all the space that you give to the future, you make the time for the present. So this was the battle I had for a land to call the present. And no, again, I might not have screenshots of iMessage fights, but my mind has the battle scars of pushing the confines of the past and the future to make that space for the present. And the present is not its own character, like I said before. It's the past's future and the future's past. I know that reminds us a lot of, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but when someone says, "Oh, you're so-and-so's daughter," it always made me quite irritated, but that's how I view the present. It's the past's future and the future's past. And it's true, because, I mean, take me for example. Who would I be if I wasn't Shree's little sister? So, in EMC this year, I realized that the traditional version of living in the moment, where people are like, "Oh yeah, the past is in the past and the future is on a whim," and I didn't believe in that anymore. I changed my perspective on it. I didn't believe in that generalized concept of living in the moment, because to me, living in the moment means to be educated on what the past, what the present really is. Be educated in the moment you're living in. Know its past, know its future, and you can be able to live in the now. Just like you all chose to do by coming to this symposium today. Looking back, it is crazy to think that all this change in my perspective started with just some stories about change. And I hope that although this talk was not about gossip like you might have thought initially, it was still just as entertaining. Thank you. Next, I would like to introduce my fellow EMCer, Drasana Kunwar.
Okay. Hello, my name is Drasana Kunwar, and if there's anything that any of you should know about chemicals, or at least I hope you do, is that they're all over the world. They're in the clothes that you're wearing right now, they're in the seat that you're sitting in right now, and they're even in the air that you breathe. These chemicals come in forms of solids, liquids, and gases. They can be elements, they can be compounds, compounds being elements when they're joined together. And although we've only learned 1% of the chemical compounds that there are, there's still much more to discover. And one of these discoveries would be the Philosopher's Stone by Nicholas Flamel. And the Philosopher's Stone is actually known to be the elixir of life, basically. And this may sound like something straight out of a Harry Potter book, because it is. However, there is a real-life case of this by Henning Brandt. He's a German alchemist who discovered phosphorus when he decided to go to a bar, go up to the attendants, and somehow get their urine and distill it. He distilled 1,500 gallons of urine in search of gold. However, instead of urine, as we know, he discovered phosphorus, the 15th element on the periodic table. Now, not all chemical discoveries can be positive. Some are obviously negative, as we know, since, as my title has said, we'll be discussing toxins. Toxins are something that affects such a wide group of people, which is what really drew me to this case, since it's not something that affects just one person or one small group of people, it's everyone. So, I would not say that I was drawn to this topic 2 years ago. However, last year, I was walking down the aisles of Walmart when I was listening to my favorite podcast, Rotten Mango, and she was discussing this specific case regarding toxins and how just one small toxin affected so many. And that just shocked me, because how can one small molecular thing affect so many people? And as I walked down those aisles, I was looking around at these cleaning supplies, these cooking supplies, and I was thinking, wow, these are way more harmful than they look. And as I went through all this research, I looked at graphs, I listened to podcasts, and I even read articles. And I kept on getting hit with new pieces of information that no one with just basic surface level knowledge would have known of. So, as we start this topic, let's just start with genetics, okay? Toxins, they can affect our genetics. And when they affect our genetics, they mutate them, okay? So genetic mutations are caused when the DNA is affected, okay? The genes in the DNA, they are somehow harmed, they're somehow deformed in some way, which then cause some kind of negative reaction to the body. And this can not only impact you, but can also pass on down to future offspring, and it can also be passed on by radiation, viruses, and other kinds of environmental toxins. So these environmental toxins, they affect the body not through genetic sequence, but by genetic expression. By the genetic expression, I mean that's not the structure of the genes, okay? It's the way that the genes express themselves. So you can't really see it, but it does happen. This happens when there are extremes in temperatures, such as really hot or really cold, or when there's extreme light, such as UV rays. Or it can happen in the environment, such as when there are pollutants in the air. This happens when really important DNA are either turned on when they're supposed to be off, or off when they're supposed to be on. So as I went through and just did some more and more research, I learned how many things are really impacted by this issue of toxins. And it's a lot more than you would expect. For example, as I said, the air. We all know what air freshener is, obviously. It's something used to make the air feel clean and smell clean. However, it's not always clean to the chemical properties. Air can sometimes contain VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds in full form, and these are basically compounds that turn into gas when at room temperature. These contain phthalates, carcinogens, which are highly cancerous, and they're found in paints, cleaning supplies, vehicle emissions, and are highly flammable. So not only do they corrode surfaces, but they can even burn your skin. These also contain other chemicals that I do not dare to even pronounce, and they result in things such as, especially phthalates. Phthalates especially lead to problems with the reproductive system, with the nervous system, and somehow even pass on allergies to future offspring. Now, on to makeup. There's something that a lot of you use, even I do. They are something that's used in daily lives, and they contain things such as asbestos, paragens, and phthalates. Wait, phthalates, didn't we just say that phthalates cause problems to the reproductive system and the nervous system? Yep, that's the right one. So we put these chemicals onto our skins and therefore transfer these kinds of consequences onto ourselves. So asbestos, they're pretty similar in nature of causing cancers, but in this case, it would be lung cancer and esophageal cancer. And in terms of lung cancer, it can further narrow your airway and make it harder for you to breathe. Now, on to the bigger parts, okay? So think about 17 years ago, okay? Think about 2008. That's when a lot of fellow EMCers were born, or when they weren't even born yet. Maybe they were still in their mother's wombs. Okay, however, there were hundreds of thousands of babies in China at that very moment suffering from an extreme case of kidney stones. This was the result of this company called Sanlu. This was a dairy company that profited off of rural farmers who compete against each other. They would milk their cows and then send that milk over to the company. However, because of the amount of farmers there were and the just amount of competition there was, they would aim to produce as much milk as possible. However, they didn't have enough cows to do that. So in order to do that, they decided to water down the milk. However, by watering it down, that did decrease the amount of protein in it. So in order to increase the amount of protein, they had to increase the amount of nitrogen, which is a form of protein. Melamine included nitrogen. So in order to check off that protein box on the regulatory testing, they decided to add melamine. Now, what is melamine? Melamine is something found in plastics, in dinnerware, and in construction material. Obviously, it's not meant for eating, and especially not meant for babies. However, it was still used. This led to kidney stones, which is basically since the melamine is not good with heat, once it's heated, it crystallizes in the urinary tract, and then as the kidney stones grow, it's harder for babies to urinate, which then leads to the kidney stones growing and growing until the bladder bursts. Now, this is already painful enough for grown-ups, so just imagine how babies would feel when they can't even express their pain. Not only that, but it also led to several kinds of kidney-based cancers and edema, which is basically when liquid flows upward to the brain and just swells up their heads, which also coined the term big head baby scandal located in China. Now, we've noticed this common pattern of how things that we use in our daily lives, they're infested with so many toxins. And the way that companies expect us to just take it is by slapping a really flimsy warning label over it and expecting us to look at it. However, just remember to always check what you've bought, make sure that everything that you buy is reliable, and always remember that there is a reason why the nutrients fact is on the back of the box. Thank you. And next we have Harshita Josti.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming tonight. My name is Harshita Josti and I researched AI in healthcare this year. AI stands for artificial intelligence. So picture this, you're in a hospital room and the person deciding your treatment plan isn't just the doctor, but it's also an algorithm. Sounds crazy, right? But it's already happening. Systems like sickbay have been taking over healthcare, trying to help doctors diagnose patients, help treat them, and kind of even help them during surgeries. Some common things sickbay does is monitor patients' data real time, alert the doctors if something goes wrong, or sickbay is able to also take millions of patient records and kind of condense it down to a few outputs for the patient. So what got me interested into this topic is the fact that it's not science fiction anymore and that AI is actually being used in healthcare. I thought of AI as something like ChatGPT or self-driving cars, but when I came across an article talking about how AI is being integrated into healthcare, that got me really interested and curious as to how it's being integrated and to what extent it's being used. So although these advancements sound impressive, AI does come with some serious issues, one of which is bias. Bias and lack of transparency are huge issues in AI. Oftentimes, giving patients the wrong treatment and giving them incorrect solutions, which could even make their issue worse. So before I start talking about the pros, cons, and kind of how AI is being managed now, I'd like to talk about how AI has begun. So you would think that AI started maybe in the past 5-10 years, but it started in the late 70s and even early 80s with a system called Mycin from the Stanford University. Mycin was a program system that was made by the doctors, that was used to diagnose blood infections and help patients by suggesting treatment plans. Although this sounds great, this wasn't actually implemented because of ethical concerns like privacy issues. So as we move forward to today and the 2010s, we see machine learning develop. Machine learning is when AI is able to take millions of patient records, use that data to output specific treatment plans that are right for the patient. An example of this would be sickbay from the medical informatics. So some common things sickbay is used for is to measure oxygen levels, heart rate, and blood pressure of a patient. So one of the biggest advantages of AI being integrated into healthcare is its early detection in cancer, specifically pancreatic cancer. So the Mayo Clinic used AI to help detect pancreatic cancer, and AI was not only able to detect it very early in its early stages, but also was able to detect it at a much higher, vision than humans can and much quicker, which can help the patient get much quicker treatment and help the patient, even help them save their life. And now for some examples involving sickbay. So sickbay was used by the Michigan Medicine, and people at the Michigan Medicine, the hospital staff, wanted a quicker way to diagnose patients and help treat them. So instead of using the regular traditional way of just testing vital signs, they used sickbay instead. And sickbay kind of gathered all their data and onto one computer. And on that computer, they got to see all the patient records and were able to kind of suggest treatment plans quick, which then helped the patient get treated quicker. Another example would be at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. There were 55 patients that got their optimal blood pressure measured by sickbay. And whenever something went wrong, for example, a doctor or nurse would get a notification, and then sickbay would just send a notification to them, and the hospital staff could just fix the issue quickly and much easier than the traditional way, which can help provide a better outcome for them. And my final example would be COVID-19, which is something we all know of. So during COVID, as we all know, hospitals were overwhelmed and so were doctors. And during this time, oftentimes doctors didn't have enough protection against these patients, often making them vulnerable too. So at the Houston Methodist Hospital, the doctors implemented the virtual ICU system. This system allowed all the patient data to be loaded onto one computer, where the patient's data would all just be seen for the doctors. And this means that there would only be one group of doctors that would be watching over hundreds of patients and helping them get treated quicker. This helped also to keep the doctors safe from the patients. Now, as I've said, there is bias in these systems, and racial bias is one of the biggest issues when it comes to AI, because AI is trained on a limited databases. So in a study by Science, there is the AI is underestimated for Black patients by about 50%, which is huge. And this means that they won't be getting a treatment that's accurate, a treatment that is just as accurate for white patients, which then leads to them getting the wrong treatment and then worsening their issue. So now what's being done to fix this issue? Well, in the US, President Biden enacted an executive order called the Artificial Intelligence, Safety, Security, and Trustworthy Use and Development of AI Order. And this order states that the AI will be put into appropriate use, making sure that patients stay safe and making sure that they're getting an accurate output from the AI. Also in the EU, which is the European Union, there was an AI Act that got enacted, which funds AI to about $200 billion, and also make sure that people stay safe from AI, and also make sure that AI is used appropriately. So as we've seen, AI can be used in both positive and negative ways, and we've seen some things that are being done to kind of keep it in its place. So now that we're informed, now that we know that there are good things like quick diagnosis and early treatment, and some negatives, like bias, and what's being done to fix it, like the EU Act and the executive order by President Biden. Now it is our turn as developers as doctors and as informed citizens to make sure that AI stays in place because real people are getting affected by it every single day. Thank you. Now I'd like to welcome Hamsini Subramanian.
Hello, everyone, and thank you all for being here at EMC Squared's 2025 Symposium. I hope you are all doing well, and I hope this night has been very informative. My name is Hamsini Subramanian, and throughout the course of this year, I have been studying the impact of different factors in space that affect the human body. So the reason as to this is because, one, space is awesome. Practically everyone wanted to be an astronaut as a kid before abandoning that for more realistic goals. But on a more serious note, as our society progresses into a spacefaring age, we need to understand the risks that space travel poses and how to best combat them. But before we get into that, however, I want to ask you all a question. Have any of you stared up at the night sky in awe and wonder? Most of us have, including myself. From cavemen all the way to the modern age, humans have long since stared at the stars and constellations, concocting their own stories about what's really happening in the night skies. While ancient civilizations could only wonder, we have the tools to solve these age-old mysteries. Ever since 1961, when Yuri Gagarin became the first man to be sent into orbit, the collective human knowledge on space has vastly increased. Even though the space race has long since ended, new discoveries are being made practically every day. We've sent over 280 people to the International Space Station. But with that comes major risks. Humans evolved right here on Earth, and nothing about space is familiar to our bodies. There is no gravity, no magnetic field, no atmosphere, nothing to protect us from the deadly rays that come from the sun. Before studying this topic, I was clueless as to the dangers that space posed. After all, many people have been in space, so it couldn't be that dangerous, right? But there's more to the vacuum than meets the eye. The same being that nourished life on Earth, the sun, is now a harbinger of death in outer space through ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation are basically just high-frequency waves that can split electrons from atoms and molecules, creating high-energy ions that can then go on to break apart covalent bonds. This is especially dangerous in the context of DNA, as any change to the structure of DNA can cause mutations, which can lead to cancers. These cosmic radiation rays are usually galactic cosmic rays, which are released by solar particle events, or SPEs, and those are typically solar flares. In the moon missions, without protection from Earth's atmosphere or magnetic field, astronauts reported light flashes in their retinas from these rays, and these cause an early onset of cataracts. Another type of cosmic radiation that is important is high linear energy transfer radiation. These are basically when a large amount of energy is concentrated on a very small area, like a laser. These can affect the epigenome, which is how genes express themselves, and specifically affect areas like cardiovascular tissue, lung tissue, and the nervous system. And this can cause lung cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, stomach cancer, and neurodegenerative diseases. While space is a dream in most people's heads, accessibility is rising fast. NASA is sending more and more astronauts to space on longer and longer missions, and even some civilians are gaining access. It won't be long until going to space is like going to Disneyland for a vacation. But that comes major safety concerns, which is what we need to address. So this begs the question, why not prescribe medicine? It would be so easy to just take a couple pills with you when you go to space, pop a couple immune supplements and multivitamins, everything's done. But it's not as simple as it may seem. Space isn't just zero gravity. It also affects fluid distributions, and the radiation, as we've discussed before, affects our genes. But space also affects our circadian rhythms. All of these, in combination with each other, affect how our body processes medication. And they also affect our immune system, which is shown in NASA's twin study, where one twin was on Earth while the other was sent into space. The results showed that the twin who was sent into space had an increased level of inflammatory cytokines, which play a role in how the immune system functions. How the immune system functions is incredibly important when designing medication, and a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really work, as all of us have different genes, and they all work in very different ways. So researching this is something that's incredibly important to space travel and the safety of astronauts. But the goal of this presentation is not to discourage anyone from pursuing their dreams of being an astronaut. Rather, it is to highlight the effort that goes into these space missions and the bravery of these astronauts. Of over 117 billion people who have ever lived on this planet, only 676 have escaped the bounds of Earth. A mere 80 years ago, escaping Earth was just a fantasy. But now, colonizing other planets may not be so far-fetched as you might think. I'd wager that in about 20 years, going to space will be accessible to anyone with enough cash, and there will be regular commercial space flights. Perhaps even in 100 years, humans on Proxima Centauri b will point at our sun and say, "That's the solar system where we came from." Thank you all for being here at EMC Squared's 2025 Symposium. All 6 of us will be here to answer your questions, comments, and for pictures. Again, we thank you so much for being here.